Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back. Our last video for our chapter 20 from our OpenStax book. We are looking at the endocrine regulation, specifically of blood pressure. And what we're going to see, this is an example of a negative feedback mechanism. Which I always like to remind students looks like a figure 8, right? So if you have like your stable, normal blood pressure, remember we said for healthy adults, it should be 120 millimeters of mercury over 80 millimeters of mercury. And so if you start to see blood pressure that's increasing beyond that, you would expect to have some mechanisms to bring it back down to normal. And then if your blood pressure is below normal, you're expecting some mechanisms to return to normal. And so really, like, depending on what you're eating and drinking, depending on how much you're using the bathroom, depending on your level of activity, we'll see that your blood pressure should be fluctuating a little bit, around this set point in a healthy adult human, right? So keep in mind, like, as we talk about regulating blood pressure, it doesn't necessarily mean like we're in an extreme case. It could just mean you ate a lot of salty food, or it could just mean you drank a whole lot of liquid, right? Or you're a little bit dehydrated, right? It could just be something along those lines. You're exercising and you're increasing your heart rate. And so then that's increasing your blood pressure, right? And so, keep that in mind. In some cases, we do see that individuals have difficulty regulating their blood pressure long term. And then that's where you need some sort of medical intervention. I've done a table, my favorite way of doing like a quick compare contrast kind of situation. And on one side of the table, I have how we can increase a low blood pressure. And notice I've made that box really big. There's a lot going on here compared to when we decrease elevated blood pressure. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Okay. So let's start with how we're going to increase a low blood pressure. And what I like to think here is, like, on some level, this is a more immediate issue. If your blood pressure is really low, you're not getting the oxygen pumped out to the tissues that you need it, and your tissues can go only so long before they suffocate, right? And also like starve. And so we're going to see that our tissues really need to have adequate perfusion to stay healthy. And so you might want to kind of use that as sort of a memory device to think like, oh, this is a much more dramatic response when our blood pressure is low compared to the other side of things. Okay. So what we're going to see is, as we're detecting blood pressure, we're going to be detecting the actual pressure is detected by a group of cells called baroreceptors. And so your baroreceptor is detecting pressure. And so if your baroreceptor is not being stimulated, meaning your blood pressure is low, then this is going to trigger your sympathetic division to become more active. And what we're going to see is, of course, the sympathetic division is releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. And we know that this is coming from the adrenal medulla. We've studied this and referred to it extensively at this point. So let's circle these as some of our hormones in this sequence of events. And we know now that our epinephrine and our norepinephrine are going to increase contractility of our skeletal muscle. And we saw that they increase the heart rate, right? So we see that they decrease repolarization, increase depolarization. So the heart rate is faster, the force of contraction is faster. And we see that it also increases vasoconstriction. So we know we can have the same amount of fluid, but we can move it through a smaller tube, and automatically that's going to increase pressure. This may be enough. This may be enough. So you may have like a little drop in blood pressure, you may get the release of your epinephrine, norepinephrine, and that picks it all back up. So maybe you're doing some exercise and your blood pressure wasn't able to be maintained initially until you get the release of your epinephrine and your norepinephrine. Okay, now if that blood pressure is still low or still persisting, continuing, that decrease in blood pressure is going to be picked up by the kidney. Now, the kidney we listed as a secondary endocrine gland. It has a group of cells that we call juxtaglomerular complex. And these are endocrine cells. These are endocrine cells. So if your blood pressure is low, if your oxygen levels are low, this is going to tell the kidney to do two things. The kidney is going to release EPO. EPO is our abbreviation for erythropoietin. So it's being released by the kidney. Is going to your red bone marrow, and it's going to increase your red blood cell production. Yeah. So if your oxygen level is low, let's make more boats to carry oxygen, right? Let's make more red blood cell oxygen transporters. That's going to also increase your blood volume. So that's going to help address some of that low blood pressure issue. Yeah. Okay, the kidney also makes what's called renin. This dude is so important. The renin is released into the blood. In the blood, we get the conversion of angiotensin I to angiotensin II. Circle both of these dudes right here, angiotensin I and angiotensin II. Now notice we have, I'm going to put it in black. We have this enzyme, which we can abbreviate ACE. This enzyme is called angiotensin converting enzyme. Angiotensin converting enzyme is required to get angiotensin I converted to angiotensin II. So there are drugs, medicines that are ACE inhibitors. You've perhaps heard of that before. And that's stopping this right here. That would stop this right here. Angiotensin II does a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to circle it also in purple. Angiotensin II, I'm going to underline it twice. Does a whole bunch of stuff. What does it do? Okay, one thing that it does is it like continues the release of the epinephrine and the norepinephrine. So that means it continues the high contractility, it continues the high heart rate, it continues the vasoconstriction. It also directly does vasoconstriction. It makes you thirsty. Remember, your plasma is like more than half of your blood volume. And in that plasma, 92% is water. So if you take more water into your body, you're effectively, on some level taking in blood plasma. Yeah. So you're increasing your body fluids. You're increasing your blood fluid right there. You're increasing your blood volume. So that's pretty cool. Okay, what else does this guy do? Angiotensin II also talks to the neurohypophysis and releases an old friend, ADH. ADH, remember, stands for antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is going to increase water reabsorption at the kidney. So you're increasing your fluid level. You're decreasing your urination. Okay. More water stays in the body. That's blood plasma. Yeah. You're also going to deal with ADH of vasoconstriction. Okay. That's not all. Angiotensin II also talks to the adrenal cortex. And it triggers the release of aldosterone. Also an old friend. Aldosterone is going to increase sodium ion reabsorption at the kidney. Oh my goodness, y'all, this is the thing that's super important here. Wherever sodium goes, water follows. This is osmosis. If you are not strong on osmosis, take a minute and go back and review. Wherever sodium goes, water follows. So if you retain sodium, if you put the sodium back in the blood, that helps to pull more water back into the bloodstream. The bulk of your blood is water. You're increasing your blood volume here. You're increasing your blood pressure here. Okay, so let's go through. I sort of regret using the white, it's hard to see. The important hormones in this sequence are the epinephrine and norepinephrine, erythropoietin, renin, angiotensin I, angiotensin II, ADH, and aldosterone. We should be able to know the stories of each one of those hormones with ease, and telling the story of how the body is increasing a low blood pressure. The other thing to pay attention to is we have shown here what's called RAS. RAS is talking about renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, RAAS. Now this whole thing is significant. We talk about it multiple times. So we're talking about it here to regulate blood pressure. We talk about it in the urinary system to talk about regulating fluid and electrolytes. And then we'll talk about it again when we're just talking about regulating fluid and electrolytes. So we'll come back to this in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and like triple underline angiotensin II because it's like this super important one. But then I'll just do like an underline for renin, angiotensin, and aldosterone so that we're getting our RAS here, our renin, angiotensin, which is like 1 and 2. So underline angiotensin 1 and aldosterone system. Okay. All right. The last sequence to look at here is how we decrease the elevated blood pressure. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll change to a, how about let's use pink here. So maybe they'll stand out a little bit better. When we talk about having the elevated blood pressure, again, we're going to see a baroreceptor detecting this blood pressure difference. And what we're going to see is this receptor is stimulated more, which is going to trigger the parasympathetic division. And the parasympathetic division, we know, is releasing acetylcholine. And what we see is that, let me do it this way. Parasympathetic releases acetylcholine. And what we see is that it is going to reduce heart rate. It's going to reduce the force of contraction, contractility. And it's going to increase vasodilation. So if we slow down our heart rate, we reduce the force of contraction, and we make our vessels larger, that might be enough to take our blood pressure to normal level. That might be enough. If it's not, what we'll see is that our cardiac muscle cells are going to be stretched more, right? So they're sort of like almost overstretched. And this is going to be the signal for the heart, secondary endocrine structure, the heart to release atrial natriuretic peptide. This can be abbreviated ANP. It's not actually called a peptide here. It's called hormone. So I think that's the difference between texts. Okay, so that would be ANH for atrial natriuretic hormone. And what this is going to do is basically reverse everything that we saw in the other sequence, right? So what we're going to see is we're going to get rid of sodium. Remember, wherever sodium goes, water follows. So if the sodium is going into the urine, the water is going into the urine. Yeah? We're going to increase our water loss at the kidney. So we're going to directly get rid of that extra fluid. And we're doing this because we're basically, let's put this actually at the top of this, or maybe you'll write it to the side, depending on your space of your notes.